From a young peasant girl to one of France's most iconic military leaders and a literal saint of the Catholic Church. That's the unique and inspiring tale of the girl we know as Joan of Arc. Born in the 15th century to peasant farmers, Joan, also known as the Maid of Orleans, is often cited as the most influential woman in French history, despite dying before even reaching her 20th birthday. The enduring power of this young girl's story is one of bravery, war, and faith, all at a time at which Europe was trying to tear itself apart. Let's pull back the curtains on what made Joan of Arc the ultimate symbol of medieval Europe right here on History Unveiled. Joan was born in the small village of Domremy in northeastern France in 1412. She was the daughter of a peasant farmer, and for the most part, life was fairly uneventful for Joan. The same, however, could not be said for France at the time. During Joan's lifetime, France was fiercely engaged in a struggle against the occupying English forces, an ongoing conflict known as the 100 Years' War, despite actually lasting for 116 years. France's need for a leader during the 100 Years' War was dire, as the English had made significant gains and controlled large portions of the country, including the major cities of Rouen and Paris. At the time of Joan's upbringing, the war had been raging for over 70 years already, meaning that generations of French people lived and died without any peace from the conflict. The French royal family and nobles were in disarray, and the country was verging on the brink of defeat. The Dauphin, Charles, who was the heir to the French throne, was an ineffective leader, and there was a general sense of hopelessness among the French people that could be felt throughout the country. This failing situation was further complicated by the fact that there were several claimants to the French throne, which further weakened the French position and gave confidence to the English that victory would be swift. The French nobility were also divided, and they engaged in internal conflicts, constantly fighting one another. This division among the nobility made it difficult to form a united front against the English, and the French army was often ill-equipped and poorly led. All in all, the war had taken a heavy toll on the French economy and society, not surprising when you consider it had been raging for several lifetimes. The constant fighting had ravaged the countryside, and many people had been displaced from their homes. The war also made it difficult for trade and commerce to flourish, which further weakened the French economy. In this context, France was desperately in need of a leader who could unite the country, raise morale, and lead the country to victory. Joan of Arc emerged as that leader. Her visions and her belief that she was on a divine mission to save France, coupled with her leadership and sharp military mind, rallied the French army and led them to a series of victories. Her arrival on the scene was a turning point in the war, and her leadership and determination gave the French people a sense of hope and renewed determination, all of which she put down to her visions from God. Joan of Arc claimed to have had a series of visions throughout her life, starting at the age of 13. These visions were a central part of her identity and guided her through her journey from a simple peasant girl to a military leader and ultimately a martyr. According to Joan, her first vision occurred in the summer of 1425. She said that she saw Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret appear to her and tell her that she was chosen by God to save France. The saints told her that it was her divine duty to drive out the English invaders and have the Dauphin crowned the King of France. These visions continued throughout her life, and she would often speak of them as the voices of the saints that guided her. Joan's visions were an important factor in her decision to leave her home and journey to Vaucouleurs, where she sought an audience with Revered de Barricourt, the local garrison commander. She convinced him to give her an escort to take her to the Dauphin in Chinon. Joan also claimed to have had a vision of the Archangel Michael, who told her that she would lead the French army to a great victory at Orleans. This vision in particular gave her the courage to convince the Dauphin to give her an army to lift the siege. Her success in this endeavor is considered to be the greatest military achievement of her career. Following the lifting of the siege of Orleans, Joan led the French army to several other victories, including the Battle of Patay. With Joan's guidance and leadership, Charles the Dauphin of France was able to march to Reims and be crowned as King Charles VII. This was a significant achievement as it marked the first time in over 20 years that a French king had been crowned in Reims. Throughout her military campaign, Joan said that her visions continued to guide her, giving her direction and reassurance in times of need. She stated that the voices would tell her when to advance, when to retreat, and when to call for a truce. This deep faith in her visions, as well as her unwavering belief that she was on a divine mission, served to legitimize her leadership in the eyes of her troops and the people of France. Despite her successes, Joan's divine quest was not to last long. Joan was captured by the Burgundians in 1430 while leading a French army to lift the siege of Compiègne. The Burgundians then sold her to the English, who saw her as a valuable prisoner. The English then put her on trial, accusing her of heresy and witchcraft, and ultimately, they found her guilty and put her to death. The trial was conducted by a court of ecclesiastical judges and was held in Rouen, which was then under English control. The trial was filled with inconsistencies and mistranslations, not only of her visions, but also her claims of being guided by the saints. The judge accused her of wearing men's clothes, a charge that she vehemently denied, stating that she wore men's clothing for safety reasons and for the freedom of movement it provided her. Her reasoning was ignored, and Joan's cross-dressing was the topic of 5 of the articles of accusation against her during the trial. She was also accused of witchcraft, as her visions were seen as a sign of her being in a league with the devil, and witchcraft was a common accusation that could be hurled at just about any European woman back in Joan's day. However, Joan maintained her innocence throughout the trial and insisted that her visions were real and that she was on a divine mission to save France. Yet, even still, the court found her guilty of heresy, and she was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. The execution itself was a public event, and it was held in the market square of Rouen. According to contemporary accounts, a large crowd had gathered to watch the execution, including many English soldiers, church officials, and members of the local population. Joan was dressed in a long white robe, symbolizing her purity and innocence, and she was tied to a tall wooden stake. She was surrounded by piles of wood which were set alight, and she was left to burn to death. She is reported to have died after about half an hour of intense suffering. Joan was only 19 years old. It goes without saying that burning at the stake is a particularly brutal form of execution, and it was reserved for those deemed to be heretics and apostates by the church. The fact that Joan was put to death in this way is a testament to the severity of the charges against her and the determination of her enemies to see her punished. It's important to note that even at this time, her execution was widely criticized as unjust, and many historians believe that the charges against her were almost entirely politically motivated. Some believe that the English were afraid of her military successes and the inspiration she provided to the French, and saw her execution as a way to weaken the French resistance. Joan's death did not mark the end of her story, however. In 1456, 25 years after her execution, Pope Calixtus III overturned her conviction and declared her innocent. He also declared her a martyr, which led to her canonization as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1920. Her rehabilitation was a reflection of the French people's admiration for her and their desire to reclaim her as a national hero. Her status as a martyr also allowed her to become an important symbol of French identity and resilience in the face of adversity. Even still to this day, she is cited as the most well-known woman in all of French history. Joan is also one of the most studied people of all the Middle Ages. This is in part due to the fact that her trials left a wealth of document evidence that gave historians plenty to research, and in part due to the huge cultural impact Joan had on both France and Christendom itself. Joan of Arc has been portrayed many times on the stage and screen, and her story goes on to inspire people of all backgrounds to this day. Religion and politics aside, Joan's story is one of resilience and utmost dedication to what she believed in. She stood up to whole nations and the church itself in the name of carrying out what she believed was her duty. Even the fear of a painful death itself was not enough to steer her from her path. The life and death of Joan of Arc will continue to endure as an example of the sheer will and strength of the human spirit. Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out the rest of the channel to see more history unveiled.